this one and then the two, and then we'll just about be at time for you to come back. All right.
I don't know how old your children are, so I don't know if this is relevant, but I'm curious what your kids think about the Ark, and how, if you had to guess, like, how will they remember this period when Dad was building the Ark?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Great
don't know how old they are either, but I brought Kepler, the older one, who's in the movie. He's now 8.
And by the way, this is a curious person. He calls his child Kepler.
Yes.
Legit. You're a legit.
I'm legit. I'm a legit.
Science nerd.
Yeah, I'm a legit nerd. I did have an astrophysicist, one, Alan Lightman, who's a pretty cool astrophysicist. I told him that my son was named Kepler. He was like, "Oh, that is so cool. How did you get that by your wife?" I was like, "I know, she liked it." Anyway, his favorite part of the movie is his grandfather singing with the slides. In fact, I think that's the only thing he thinks is good about the movie. Came to our Copenhagen sort of premiere and slept through most of the movie. But he loved. But you know, he wanted me to wake him up for that part. And I mean, on some level, that's sort of ridiculous, but it's also pretty great to imagine that one of his memories is his grandfather, you know, participating in this strange, you know, sort of elegy for his old slides. And you know, there's just kind of a lot to think about there.
There is, and also that the thing about everything is that they take on different meanings over time.
Yeah.
When the context changes, when the world around the thing changes, and so Kepler and your kids are going to have, this movie is going to mean different things at different points in their life when they see it again, and I think that's really deep as well, that we can never know what, I mean, just today, with the announcement of the death of the Russian dissident Navalny, the footage of him from yesterday talking means something entirely different today, now that we know or think we know that he's dead. It takes on an utterly different meaning, and so there's also that thing, not simply the hubris of wanting the right things to exist.
Yeah.
Is it interesting the ceramicists didn't want child pornography or Nazi propaganda? Well, that is humanity also.
Yeah.
Are they not the things that we would wish to warn people of or remind them? But we want the best things of ourselves to exist, but we don't know what they're going to mean when future raccoons find them. So.
Right. Archive purists, I would suggest, define a proper archival material as something that is stored without any intention. So it's without regard to an audience or a story. It's almost stored because we don't know why. And that's a really provocative idea, and a kind of a recognition that we don't know what will be useful or relevant or interesting to people years hence. And every time anybody encounters any archival material, that experience is inherently different.
Yeah.
You know, every time you know, if you watch this movie tomorrow, your experience would be different.
Yes.
Because you've changed.
Yeah.
We argued about that one.
It's so interesting. Okay, I saw 2 other hands. Yes, these 2, and then we will draw this evening to a close.
Hi. I really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was really beautiful. I'm curious, as you talk to a lot of interesting people, scientists, historians, filmmakers, did you have those interviews lined up ahead of time, or as you were kind of on your documentary journey, were you like, oh, I need to find an expert in this field and interview them, and did it kind of take you on a different path than you initially expected?
Yeah, for sure. It was about half and half. I would love to say that everybody we interviewed just sort of popped up along the way, it'd be really amazing to make a movie sort of purely like that, where you could really, but it would probably take a long time to make, or just be too hard. But the spirit of it was very much that. We wanted to let ourselves be, pushed in new directions by interesting cues. And we sort of started that way, right, with the cutting of the trees, and then that led to the dendrochronology, and which led onto the limestone, which led us to Majorca. But after a while, we sort of ran out of building materials to be inspired by. And I knew that I was like, I only want to talk to this neuroscientist who studies memory. So we kind of invited him for some random time in June when his schedule would allow. But then it had to fit into the film at that particular time. It had to be after the person who came when the arc was at a certain stage. And so it became a really interesting puzzle to try and make the story feel coherent. I'm not sure it does feel coherent. I think it's a little loose and spirited, and I hope that is.
I love that part of it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting the way that different experts were incorporated into it as the film progressed, and so that's why.
Great, thank you. Would you pass the mic to your fellow questioner? Yes.
I was very curious about one specific part as it relates to your own personal journey and what you've taken away from this experience. We talked about the pressure being off, but the understanding of how insignificant we are, a mountain being ephemeral, or why bother taking pictures. And as a documentary filmmaker who's probably obsessed with archiving things and being very organized with it, my question is, the hard drive that you destroyed, did you choose it at random, or did you kind of know that one probably doesn't have anything important on it?
That's it. Yeah, you hit on that. Yeah, exactly. This, no one needs to see this. It's funny. I mean, Werner has this, thing of like, okay, everything that's not in the movie, and of course he makes a lot of fiction films, which I do not, and even his documentaries he sort of shoots like they're fiction films. So in the sense of sort of working with characters in a little more of a scripted way than I would, and so he discards all that stuff, and I don't know, I sort of have like the inverse, or is it the inverse? I don't know, the opposite relationship to a lot of the footage I have, which is like the stuff that's seen the light. Like, okay, that's now in your brains, and it's had a life, it's lived, and now it can go away. The stuff that hasn't, shouldn't I keep that? Isn't that the archive? I don't know what this is for. I don't know what it means.
KJ made an entire film.
I know, I'm just sitting there shaking my head because my new revelation was like, oh, you can use and reuse your footage. So even the footage that's seen the light, right? I think in some ways we were raised with this idea as cinematographers and filmmakers, like you use a shot only once in a film. Once it's been seen, you don't do it again, right? And then when I made Camera Person, it was like, oh my goodness, like I'm gonna see something wholly new in this footage into the future, which, sort of put me back into that terrifying place of, must I save everything? Because I don't know if I'm going to need it or not in the future. I once filmed with someone who had lived through the Depression, and there was just everywhere in her house, there'd be these things, she'd be like, what's going on here? And she had this big, jar of pens, and they all had little colored pieces of tape, attached to them. And I said, well, what's happening? And she said, oh, those are all the ones that don't work. And I said, so why are you keeping them? And she said, well, they might work in the future, right? So, which I think is the struggle that we're all faced with, right?
This has been lovely. I've gone way over. I apologize. I had one job, which was to keep us to time, but it's beautiful. Sometimes you want to just hear from people. I wanted to end by just reading out a few lines from Alyssa Wilkinson's review of the film. They're the closing lines of her film review in the New York Times that came out yesterday, because I just thought they were lovely. She loves the film.